Hello and welcome. I'm Rawia Alami and this is the Dailies, where we take a look at important news stories, reports, analysis and articles published in newspapers and media outlets across the world. Most newspapers continue to focus on the latest developments of the Israel-Iran conflict, reporting on the details of the American-brokered ceasefire between the two countries. Many delved into President Trump's frustration and strong statements yesterday regarding violations of the ceasefire by both sides, but more so on Israel's part. Also, many news outlets and newspapers reported on the findings of the initial U.S. report on the damage caused by American strikes on Iranian nuclear sites. We'll start with the Washington Post, which published or reported on that today, saying that findings of the U.S. initial damage report shows that Iran nuclear program was set back by months, not obliterated as initially reported. The report highlights the aftermath of the U.S. airstrikes on Iran's nuclear site at Fordo, Natanz and Esfahan, launched on June 22, 2025, and initial U.S. intelligence reports released just 2 days later on the June 24th revealed that while the attacks caused significant damage, they only set Iran's nuclear program back by months and not even years. The Defense Intelligence Agency found that core components, including most centrifuges and much of Iran's enriched uranium, survived or were moved before the strikes. This contradicts President Trump's claims of total destruction. The report also points out that ongoing assessments may change as more information is gathered. It concludes that the strikes delayed but did not eliminate Iran's nuclear ambitions, and that the true extent of the damage remains uncertain. The Jerusalem Post published an exclusive report today about the tense phone call between President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that took place yesterday, as Israeli jets were minutes away from attacking Iran in response to a ceasefire violation. According to the report, Trump raised his voice, demanding Netanyahu stop the attack and warning that no one should undermine what he saw as his personal achievement, the ceasefire. Apparently, Netanyahu said little, repeatedly thanking the U.S. president, and ultimately called off the main strike. Instead, Israel hit only a radar station near Tehran. The piece points out that the U.S. also warned Iran via Qatar not to launch further attacks. The report concludes that both sides are now trying to establish new rules to prevent escalation, and Qatar is working to restart nuclear talks between Iran and the U.S. David Charter published a timeline in The Times of how the fragile truce between Iran and Israel unfolded. Charter recounts the dramatic 3-day sequence behind President Trump's ceasefire deal between Iran and Israel. On Saturday night, Trump ordered a U.S. bombing raid, Operation Midnight Hammer, targeting Iran's nuclear sites, aiming to show American power and force Iran to negotiate. On Sunday, Trump faced backlash from his base and called on Qatar's emir to help broker a truce, as U.S. and Qatari officials worked urgently to prevent further escalation. Now, by Monday, after Iran's symbolic missile attack on a U.S. base in Qatar, also arranged with advance notice and mostly intercepted, Trump announced a ceasefire, with Iran stopping first and Israel following. The article concludes that despite ongoing certainty, the deal marked a rare pause in the conflict, thanks to swift diplomacy and Trump's brinkmanship. Let's go back to the Washington Post, which conducted a poll on what do Americans think about the airstrikes on Iran nuclear facilities ordered by President Trump this past weekend. Also, they were trying to measure how these opinions have shifted since before the U.S. attack. The results show that support for the strikes has increased, especially among Republicans, jumping from 25% to 38%, while opposition remained steady at 45%. Notably, support also surged among military and veteran households, rising from 37% to 54%. However, most Americans remain concerned about the risk of a full-scale war with Iran, with about three-quarters expressing concern. As you can see on this dotted chart, when it comes to concern, about 38% said that they were very concerned, 36% said somewhat concerned, and not so concerned, they made up about 17%, not at all concerned, about 9%. But when it comes to confidence that the airstrikes will stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon, Americans are indeed split. 52% are at least somewhat confident, while 48% are not. Also, if we look here, the public is also wary of further military action, with only 22% supporting regime change and just 31%, as you can see, are in favor of more strikes if Iran's nuclear capabilities were not destroyed. Now, the article concluded also that while support for the strikes has grown, most Americans are cautious about escalation and prefer diplomacy over war. An analysis published by the New York Times asked a very important question, and that is, will America's preemptive strike on Iran discourage other countries from pursuing a nuclear weapon, or just the opposite? The analysis highlights the debate that took place after the American strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities regarding the impact of these strikes. It goes on to say that some experts warn that Iran and other countries might now see nuclear weapons as the only protection against attack, especially after North Korea's example. In the days indeed following the strikes, support for nuclear development rose in places like South Korea, while Japan debated new security options. The piece points out that while Trump hoped to show strength, the lesson for many may be the opposite. In a world of unreliable alliance, having a nuclear weapon may seem more necessary than ever. The New York Times also published a news analysis on how Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has used his recent success against Iran, including persuading the US to strike its nuclear sites. He's used it to strengthen his political position at home. Now, after 18 months of war in Gaza and low poll numbers, Netanyahu's bold moves against Iran in late June 2025 have boosted his popularity and given him more room to maneuver. Now, with strong public support and a broader mandate for his negotiators in Gaza ceasefire talks, Netanyahu could potentially end the war and still win re-election. The article points out that while his hardline coalition partners still resist compromise, Netanyahu may wait until after the summer recess to make any big decisions, hoping his new security credentials will last long enough to secure his future. The Times of Israel reported today on envoy Steve Witkoff's latest statements to Fox News, in which he announced that the US and Iran have begun preliminary peace talks, both directly and also through intermediaries. Witkoff said the discussions are promising and expressed confidence in reaching a comprehensive peace deal soon. The report also quoted Witkoff, who insisted the US strikes set Iran's nuclear program back for years, despite leaked intelligence suggesting only a months-long or some months-long delay. Also, the piece points out that while the White House claims total destruction of Iran's nuclear facilities, experts and media reports question this, as we have already mentioned, noting some sites may have survived. The report concludes that as a fragile ceasefire holds, both sides are now focused on diplomacy over further conflict. And we'll end with the Wall Street Journal, which published an exclusive report on how the Israel-Iran conflict has led to a rapid shift in China's energy strategy. Now, in just days, as tensions spiked and Iran threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz, China, which gets a third of its gas from the Middle East, began urgently considering a stalled deal with Russia for the power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline. The timeline shows that after years of talks, the recent conflict pushed Beijing to seek alternatives to risky Middle Eastern imports, even as a ceasefire was announced. The report also points out that while Russia wants a fast track to the pipeline, especially before Putin's September visit to China, disagreements over price and ownership remain unresolved. The piece concludes that the crisis has accelerated China's timeline for diversifying its energy sources. That's it for today. Thanks for watching.